The hidden cost of strategic self-concealment and the relational isolation created by weaponized privacy. Stro. The individual who has learned to hide their vulnerabilities as a survival mechanism now faces profound loneliness, inability to receive support, and the exhausting burden of perpetual emotional self-sufficiency. You've learned to keep your cards close to your chest, not because you're secretive by nature, not because you don't trust easily, though that's what people assume. You withhold certain parts of yourself because somewhere along the way you learn that exposure equals danger, that showing your hand means giving someone else the power to hurt you. So you smile, you engage, you offer just enough of yourself to seem open, to seem present, but never the whole truth, never the raw, unfiltered version of what's actually happening inside. You've become so good at this calculated vulnerability that most people don't even notice the walls. They think they know you. They think you're doing fine. But you know the truth. You know that beneath the functional exterior, there's a part of you that's been holding its breath for years, waiting for the moment it's safe enough to exhale, waiting for a world that might never come, a world where showing weakness doesn't feel like handing someone a loaded weapon. And here's the paradox that defines your existence. The very strategy that protected you from harm has now become the architecture of your isolation. The emotional fortress you built to survive has become a prison you can't escape. The selective vulnerability that once kept you safe now keeps you alone. You learned early that certain things, certain truths about yourself, should never see the light of day, and you were right. At the time, you were absolutely right. But what saved the child is now suffocating the adult. You've become so proficient at emotional self-sufficiency that you've forgotten how to let anyone in. You've trained yourself so thoroughly to expect betrayal that you've made genuine connection nearly impossible. And the cruelest part? You know this. You see the pattern. You understand intellectually that your hypervigilance is no longer serving you. But understanding doesn't make you feel any safer. This is the psychology of strategic concealment. This is what happens when you learn too young that vulnerability is weakness, that need is burden, that showing your full self is an invitation for attack. This is the hidden cost of learning to survive by hiding. And today, we're going to examine the 5 specific things you've learned never to show, and why keeping them hidden is slowly destroying your ability to experience genuine human connection. Let's start with what we're actually talking about here. Strategic concealment is not introversion. It's not privacy. It's not healthy boundaries. It's a specific form of relational armor that develops in response to emotional unsafety, a learned hypervigilance around which aspects of the self are permissible for public consumption. In attachment theory, pioneered by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, this pattern aligns most closely with avoidant attachment, a relational style that develops when early caregivers are inconsistently available, dismissive of emotional needs, or outright hostile to displays of vulnerability. The child learns a brutal lesson. Emotional expression leads to rejection, criticism, or worse. So they adapt. They learn to need nothing, to show nothing, to become impenetrable. But here's what's happening neurologically. Your brain's threat detection system, the amygdala and its associated networks, has been sensitized through repeated experiences of emotional danger. Every time vulnerability led to humiliation, every time honesty was weaponized against you, every time you reached out and were met with coldness or mockery, your nervous system encoded a simple equation: exposure equals threat. This creates what psychologists call hypervigilance, a state of constant environmental scanning for potential danger. But in your case, the danger isn't physical, it's relational. You're perpetually monitoring conversations for signs that you've revealed too much, scanning faces for micro-expressions of judgment, calculating in real time which version of yourself is safe to show. Think of it like this. Most people have a dimmer switch for vulnerability. They can adjust their openness based on the situation, the relationship, the moment. But your switch is binary. It's either completely off or, in extremely rare circumstances with extremely trusted people, briefly, terrifyingly on. And this isn't paranoia. This is pattern recognition. Your brain has cataloged thousands of data points that confirm your hypothesis. Showing certain things invites exploitation. And those certain things fall into 5 specific categories. 5 types of exposure that feel too dangerous, too risky, too likely to be used against you. The French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wrote about the concept of bad faith, the act of deceiving oneself to escape the anxiety of authentic existence. But what happens when hiding isn't self-deception, but self-preservation? When the mask isn't denying reality, but protecting you from it? This is where strategic concealment becomes something more complex than simple dishonesty. It becomes a dissociative strategy, a way of fragmenting the self into safe for public consumption versus too dangerous to reveal. You're not lying, you're compartmentalizing, offering curated fragments while keeping the whole picture locked away. And your nervous system? It's exhausted. Because maintaining this level of control requires constant cognitive resources. You're running background processes at all times. Can I say this? How will they react? What information gives them power over me? What truth makes me too exposed? The default mode network of your brain, the system responsible for self-referential thinking and social cognition, never gets to rest. You can't simply be. You must constantly manage, edit, protect. This is the neurological tax of strategic concealment. And you've been paying it for so long, you've forgotten what it feels like not to. Here's what nobody tells you about living this way. The loneliness isn't just painful, it's existential. Because you can be surrounded by people, laughing, engaging, seemingly connected, and still feel utterly, profoundly alone. Because they don't know you. They know the version you've decided is safe, the curated self, the managed persona. And somewhere deep inside, a part of you is screaming to be seen. Not the competent version, not the functional version, not the I've got it all together version, the real version, the one that's tired, the one that's scared, the one that doesn't have all the answers and doesn't want to pretend anymore. But showing that version feels like standing naked in a crowded room. Carl Jung spoke extensively about the concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or hide from view. He argued that wholeness requires integration, not amputation, that we can't selectively show only our acceptable parts without fragmenting our psyche. But what Jung didn't fully address is this. What happens when hiding the shadow isn't neurosis, but survival? When integration feels like suicide? Because that's what it feels like to you. Showing your full self doesn't feel like healing. It feels like handing someone the tools of your own destruction. You've seen what happens when people know too much. You've watched your honesty be weaponized, your struggles used as punchlines, your fears turned into ammunition during arguments, your needs treated as inconveniences, your pain dismissed as dramatic. So you learned the brutal calculus. Authenticity is expensive, and the price is usually paid in humiliation. This creates what I call invisible grief, a mourning for a version of connection you've never actually experienced. You grieve the relationships you can't have because you won't allow yourself to be fully known. You grieve the intimacy that lives just beyond the walls you've built. You grieve the version of yourself that might have existed if the world had been safer. And the cruelest part? You blame yourself. You tell yourself you're too closed off, too damaged, too broken to connect normally. You pathologize your own survival strategy, failing to recognize that your hypervigilance made perfect sense in the context that created it. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard described anxiety as the dizziness of freedom, the overwhelming sensation of infinite possibility. But your anxiety isn't about freedom. It's about captivity, the crushing weight of knowing that genuine connection exists, theoretically, but remains forever out of reach behind the walls you can't seem to lower. You're not afraid of being alone. You're afraid of being known. Because being known means being vulnerable. And vulnerability means giving someone the power to reject the real you, not the managed version, not the curated highlights, but the full, unedited, messy truth of who you actually are. And if they reject that, if they see the real you and walk away, that would confirm your deepest fear, that you were right all along. that the parts of you that you hide are, in fact, unlovable. That your strategy of concealment wasn't paranoia, but accurate risk assessment. So you maintain the fortress. You keep the 5 things hidden. You sacrifice connection for safety, intimacy for control, wholeness for survival. And every day, a part of you wonders, how long can I keep living like this? So what are these 5 things? What specific aspects of yourself have you learned to hide so thoroughly that their absence defines your relational life? 1. You never show genuine need, answer. You've trained yourself to be utterly self-sufficient. You don't ask for help, not because you don't need it, but because needing anything feels like weakness. You become the person everyone leans on, never the person who leans. You'd rather struggle in silence for weeks than ask for 30 seconds of assistance. Why? Because somewhere along the way, your needs were treated as burdens. Your requests were met with sighs, eye rolls, or outright rejection. So you learned, needing nothing is safer than risking rejection. Adult manifestation. You become the hyper-competent one, the one who has it together, the one people admire but never think to check on. You suffer in absolute silence, and when you finally break, people are shocked, not because you were hiding pain, but because you've trained them to believe you don't experience it. 2. You never show deep emotional pain. You'll share frustrations, maybe even surface-level sadness, but the real pain, the existential despair, the bone-deep hurt, the moments when you're barely holding on, that stays hidden. You've learned to perform emotional stability even when you're crumbling inside. Why? Because your pain was once dismissed, minimized, or used against you. You learned that suffering is a private affair, that breaking down is ammunition for others, that showing the depth of your hurt invites either dismissal or exploitation. Adult manifestation. You become someone people describe as strong or resilient, never realizing these are euphemisms for emotionally inaccessible. You cry alone. You process trauma in isolation. You hit rock bottom quietly. And by the time anyone notices, you've already climbed back up. Not because you're strong, but because you never let them see you fall. 3. You never show uncertainty or confusion. SS. You've learned to project confidence, competence, certainty, even when you're drowning in doubt. Admitting you don't know something feels like exposing incompetence. Asking for clarification feels like revealing stupidity. So you nod along, figure it out later. Fake it until you make it. Why? Because your questions were once met with impatience or mockery. Your confusion was treated as evidence of inadequacy. You learned that uncertainty is punished, so you perform certainty as a shield. Adult manifestation. Shallow. You become the person who researches everything privately, who never asks stupid questions, who would rather fail silently than succeed with help. You shoulder the burden of constant self-education because admitting you don't understand something feels more dangerous than remaining ignorant. 4. You never show enthusiasm or unguarded joy. SS. When something excites you, you temper it. You add disclaimers. You preemptively mock your own interests. You've learned to kill your enthusiasm before someone else does it for you. Genuine, unfiltered excitement feels dangerously exposing. Why? Because your joy was once ridiculed. Your interests were mocked. Your passions were dismissed as childish or stupid. You learn that caring deeply about something gives others a target, a guaranteed way to hurt you. Adult manifestation. Ostics, you become someone who doesn't really care about much. You curate your interests to be socially acceptable, palatable, defensible. You rob yourself of joy in real time, not because you don't feel it, but because feeling it fully requires vulnerability you can't afford. 5. You never show your ambitions or dreams. SE. You keep your deepest hopes private. You don't talk about what you really want, what you're working toward, what you dream of becoming. Because announcing your dreams feels like inviting failure, and failing publicly feels unbearable. Why? Because your aspirations were once mocked or dismissed. Your dreams were treated as unrealistic. Your goals were met with skepticism or outright laughter. You learn that hope is a liability, that wanting something makes you vulnerable to disappointment and mockery. Adult manifestation. Asterisk, you become someone who achieves in silence. You work toward goals you never mention. You hit milestones you don't celebrate because celebrating requires announcing you cared enough to try. You rob yourself of shared joy because the risk of shared disappointment feels too high. 6. You never show your true desires in relationships. S. This one's subtle. You adapt. You become what others need. You mold yourself to fit their expectations, their preferences, their comfort zones. Your actual wants, needs, and boundaries stay carefully hidden behind a performance of easygoing flexibility. Why? Because expressing preferences once led to conflict. Having boundaries once led to accusations of being difficult. Being yourself once led to rejection. So you learn that being loved requires being easy, and being easy requires hiding who you actually are. Adult manifestation. Ostics, you become the chameleon. The person who fits anywhere, matches anyone, requires nothing. And then you wonder why your relationships feel hollow, never realizing it's because you've never let anyone meet the real you. These aren't personality traits. These are survival strategies. Shit. And the reason they feel so permanent, so intrinsic to who you are, is because they were forged in the fire of necessity. They worked. They kept you safe. They protected you from harm in an environment where harm was likely. But here's the crucial recognition. The environment has changed. Your nervous system hasn't caught up. Das. You're still running software designed for a threatening world, applying it indiscriminately to every relationship, every situation, every moment of potential vulnerability. You're treating every human interaction like a potential ambush because, at one point, most of them were. The work isn't to shame yourself for these strategies. The work is to witness them, to recognize the wounded logic that created them, to understand that the child who learned these lessons was brilliant, not broken. But the adult you're becoming needs different tools. So how do you begin to lower walls that have kept you alive? First, you have to understand this. Healing doesn't mean becoming recklessly vulnerable. It means becoming selectively vulnerable. This. It means learning to distinguish between people who've earned access to your full self and people who haven't. It means recognizing that not everyone deserves your truth, but someone does. Probably several someones. Start with the practice of witnessing without judgment. Notice when the impulse to hide arises. Don't fight it. Don't shame it. Just notice. There's the urge to downplay my excitement. There's the instinct to say, I'm fine when I'm not. There's the automatic response to need nothing. Witnessing creates space between stimulus and response. It interrupts the automatic pattern long enough for you to choose differently. Second, practice microdosing vulnerability. You don't have to tear down the fortress overnight. You can create small, controlled experiments in authentic expression. Share a small need with a trusted person. Admit a minor uncertainty. Let a fraction of your enthusiasm show. Watch what happens. Collect new data. Let your nervous system learn that vulnerability doesn't always equal danger. This is the heart of reparenting your inner child, the process of providing yourself with the safety your younger self never received. You become both the protector and the protected. You learn to create internal safety so that external vulnerability feels less catastrophic. Third, engage in shadow work. This is the Jungian practice of integrating the hidden, denied, or repressed parts of yourself. It requires sitting with the parts you've deemed too much or not enough. The needy part, the uncertain part, the joyful part, the ambitious part. Not to fix them, not to change them, but to reclaim them as legitimate aspects of a whole human being. The psychologist Donald Winnicott introduced the concept of the true self versus the false self. The false self is the adaptive persona we create to survive in environments that can't handle our authenticity. The true self is who we are beneath the performance. He argued that psychological health requires reuniting with the true self, not by destroying the false self, but by recognizing it as a protective mechanism that's no longer needed in every context. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be integrated. And integration requires something deeply counterintuitive, choosing softness in a world that taught you hardness. It means allowing yourself to need, to hurt, to be uncertain, to be enthusiastic, to hope, to want. Not recklessly, not with everyone, but with someone, in small, sacred moments of chosen vulnerability. Because here's the profound truth. The opposite of strategic concealment isn't naive openness. It's discerning authenticity. Astesh. It's knowing who's safe. It's trusting yourself to recognize emotional safety. It's believing that you're worth the risk of being fully known, not by everyone, but by the right ones. The philosopher Brené Brown has spent decades researching vulnerability, and she concluded something radical. Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. But you do have control. You get to choose who sees you. You get to decide which walls come down, when, and for whom. Your hypervigilance was never the problem. It was the solution to a problem that no child should have had to solve. And the fact that it's now limiting you doesn't make it wrong. It makes it outdated. You're not broken for hiding. You're brilliant for surviving. But survival and living are not the same thing. And at some point, you have to decide, do you want to keep surviving or do you want to risk living? This is the uncomfortable truth about psychological weakness. The things you hide to protect yourself eventually become the things that isolate you. But it's also the hopeful truth. The moment you recognize the pattern is the moment you can begin to change it. You are not your defenses. You are the person underneath them, the one who's been waiting patiently for the world to become safe enough to emerge. And maybe it never will be completely safe. Maybe vulnerability always carries risk. But maybe, just maybe, the risk of staying hidden forever is greater than the risk of being seen. If this resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of how we protect ourselves and why that protection sometimes becomes our prison. You're not alone in this. You never were. You were just too well hidden for anyone to find you.